Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the War Report, where once again we've been having much more interesting off-air conversations that we could not have on air. So you people will never truly know what you miss unless we do a Rumble exclusive. Speaking of which, I know I need to get the Rumble archive up. One of
Yeah.
you will probably tell me. A couple of you already have. I'll get on that. I just forgot. It's been. I'm not gonna pretend like I've been extremely busy, but there have been some things. Nothing major, nothing urgent, but just some things I've had to take care of that take a little bit more of priority than, of course, my favorite
Mm.
3 hours of the week. but
Yeah.
but with all that being said, or I don't know, every 10 days to however often we do this show. But we try not to go more than a month out doing the show. I think we do a good job at that. You guys seem to appreciate it. You show up in the same numbers every week. We have a small but dedicated audience. Once again, we appreciate all of you. It's very fun. What discussion we do have in the comments, like I said, it's not a very active comment section. I don't begrudge any of you for that. Sometimes you can just listen to something you don't really have anything to add. Fair enough. I'm like that with a lot of things. But those of you who usually do say something, it's always interesting. Always, and even some good correcting information. I've learned a lot from you guys. When
Mm.
you don't get shadow banned, because like I said, I know the subject matter of the show sometimes does not lend itself to being automatically approved for the comment section. So I have to go in, click on the thing, oh, approve, blah 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 blah. So sometimes just know I'm not ignoring you. I just don't see it.
Yep.
And it's a shame. And if I don't, you know what? Feel free to spam me. I sincerely don't care. Just like leave 20 comments if you want to. It's whatever. Just don't fed post. Just don't say anything that can get me in trouble. If you choose to get yourself in trouble, that's one thing. I don't condone it. I don't wish that upon you. But just don't drag me into it. That's all I ask. But I'm of the understanding that we have some news topics to discuss.
Oh boy. Yeah. This has honestly been a very active week and a little more. Um, uh, Graham didn't die again.
Uh oh.
Yeah, it has been lots of things going on. Maybe the most interesting is the development that is now the dynamic that we've been closely monitoring between Iran and America, in the war against Iran. But I think maybe a not too distant second is the theater in Ukraine and what's happening there, because I think, well, there's been a lot of machinations, as you know. Sirski has been dismissed. In a way, it was inevitable that that was going to happen
Farewell,
because,
General 200. Farewell, Butcher of Bakhmut. You'll be
yeah,
missed.
yeah,
Farewell, mastermind of the Kursk operation. We don't know what we'll do without you.
yeah. Now he was responsible for the Kursk operation. That's true. And the guy that's replacing him, Drapny, uh, he's responsible for halting the Russians in the Volchansk area. Remember that in one day, the Russians captured something like 240 or 214 square kilometers, which was, honestly, in 2024, that was unheard of. The war really did quickly change after the fall of, or the autumn of 2022. And it's kind of kept that character with some differences each year. One of them being, and probably the most prominent, the use of drones. But yes, he was responsible for that, but he was also responsible for the Russians sorry, for the Ukrainians pushing out the Russians from the Kharkov Oblast after they withdrew from the Kiev Oblast. And the Sumy is part of the deal, the peace deal the Russians, Putin, wanted to sign at the end of March,
Yes, this is all
2022.
harkening back to that 6 month period between March and September of 2022, from the fake out peace agreement all the way until the autumn counteroffensive.
Hmm. Yes. Yeah, so I don't know which topic you want to start with first. There's other topics. That's not the only one, but
Well,
or the only two.
I think we can get started with Ukraine, and then the rest of the topics will probably fall into place from there.
Okay, so I'll start with maps. I'm using Syriac maps and uh, um, South Front maps.
Now, I just want to start by saying before we do the map segment, we had a very bitter disagreement over this. I wanted to use Deep State, but I was overridden. Overridden onto my own show, mind you. That's how much influence this guy has over here.
That's my patience has limits. So, um, so why don't we start with the Syriac maps at the top? Because well, it's a little bit more zoomed out, and it gives you a better idea of what it is that the Russians are trying to accomplish here in the Konstantinovka direction. So you can see that the Russians are expanding basically everywhere. They're expanding north of Konstantinovka, in other pockets west of Konstantinovka. If you look at the left side of this slide, and in the very difficult area to the right of Konstantinovka, where there is still a salient, a pocket of Ukrainians, although it's smaller since our last show. And part of the reason for that is the Russians have finally taken all of Chasiv Yar instead of like taking 90% of it in 2024 and then essentially being on hold. But that hold is what gave the Ukrainians access to the highland areas. Chasiv Yar is in a highland area, which stretches down south and then goes westward. So the areas that the Ukrainians are in right now, most of it is the lowland or a small inclination. Now, if we move to the Osikove, the Osikove front, the Osikove area it's a tiny town, or a little town, but it's better to look at it as a suburb of Konstantinovka. And the map, this is from the 23rd of July, shows you where the Russians are concentrating. This is more blown up than what you saw on Syriac maps. The yellow areas where the Russians have begun infiltration into this direction, and you can see that after this, the next big town is Drushk. Um, Dushkrovka is obviously a lot bigger than Osikove. So, uh, yeah. And of course, if they continue going further north, they're eventually going to reach Kramatorsk, and then north of Kramatorsk is Slavyansk. The next area we're going to look at is Liman. Liman has been this sort of foggy area where, north of Liman, the Ukrainians have successfully eaten away at the salient that crests over Liman from the north and stretches westward. But this map will give you an idea of just how much withering of that salient has happened, which is to say, not enough to play a significant role. And if you look more closely, you can see that much of Liman is actually in the gray. Now, it was more in the gray prior to the 23rd of July, but the Ukrainians have managed to re-enter the central area of Liman. The southern area of Liman is under Russian control, and then the Russians have two little toe infiltrations in the east side of Liman. But I think Liman is very much a place that the Russians could take and probably will take before Christmas. This in a way, Liman has to be taken before any serious infiltration into Slavyansk and Kramatorsk can take place. Although it's not easy to transfer supplies from Lima down to them, it is nonetheless an important area, more so for the Russians to send supplies rather than the Ukrainians trying to supply Slavyansk from Liman, if that makes sense, because they're just they don't have the capabilities that the Russians have in this logistical respect. Next, we move to Dnepropetrovsk, and I'll have a few slides, but we'll start with this one from today, from July 27th. This is an area, I would say, northeast of Gulyapolye, and it is just inside Dnepropetrovsk. It's closer to Pokrovsk than it is to Gulyapolye, um, or Grishinya. It's anyways, you can see that the Russians have made some inroads in uh, Kristoforovka. So now, as I've been saying for a couple of months now, the Russians are very much challenged in the Dnepropetrovsk area, more so in the Zaporozhye, all of them. So the Petrovsk and the more north inroads that the Russians to move a little bit, and that yellow is now like a land. If I'm not mistaken, this area might have been a more Russian control. And you can see that the Ukrainians are pushing further and further eastward. So, and pay attention to the bottom left-hand corner, because that will link up with another yellow patch that's developed north of Gulyapolye. So remember, this is south of the Dnepropetrovsk we were just looking at, and we'll continue to go further south. And so here it is. So you can see that yellow, there's nothing quite consolidated there. They're almost, from what I've read from mill bloggers, is almost as many Ukrainians as there are Russians there. Um, that said, the Ukrainians have been very successful in refusing the Russians to be able to consolidate their gains here. Nonetheless, the Russians are still pushing westward, as you can see. And the Ukrainians south of them are also pushing further south. They've regained some territory there, but the Russians have gained a little bit more territory in the north. Gulyapolye is still safe, but it's not as safe as it was, let's say, in February or March or even April. So now we move west towards Zaporozhye, the same latitude. You can see the situation here has stabilized for the Russians. I believe this is also from the 23rd or the 24th. The Russians are now fighting for areas that they actually already took last year and in the winter. And but they stop some of the hemorrhaging. This is an area that is just west of Orykhov, and along the banks of the Dnieper. But for a while, I didn't know what was going to happen. Lobkova is the sort of the major town, well, one of the smaller towns that was threatened by the Ukrainians, that they would lose it, and of course that would create a pocket of Russians stuck along the Dnieper, which isn't really a river anymore. There's only a small trickle of water after the destruction of all the dams, both by the Ukrainians and subsequently by the Russians. So now we move to back to the Donetsk area. This is an area that is west of Pokrovsk. Slightly the Russians consolidated on 23rd of July. It's more of a of general area. We go to the next slide. Supply maps, and you can see here that the Russians are moving well into Svetle. They're moving north of that area. This area is just north of what we were looking at. Probably no more than 10, 20, maybe 25 kilometers, depending on the area that we're discussing. Again, you get the same at the bottom center. That's Grishinier, Grishino. It depends on whether you're using a Russian or Ukrainian pronunciation. Move to Kharkov. Now, this was an area where, like, you can see this is in Volchansk, by the way, just to clarify. So this is Volchansk. The Russians are fine and east and west. Continuous border. And they will then want to, if you look at the map towards the right bottom hand corner, there. So this is the buffer zone that the um, wanting to create to not necessary. It's just repetitive. So this is Slavyansk. Slavyansk is the northernmost area of the Donetsk Oblast. You can see that the Russians in the Syriac map have moved since last week further west. They are getting very close to Mykolaievka or Nikolaevka, depending on which pronunciation you want to use. They're only about 3 kilometers. I mean, some Russian troops have actually infiltrated the outskirts of the town. It's on a high ground. It's on a high ground that is higher than Slavyansk or Kramatorsk. So you can see that the Russians have moved past the canal system that links up with the Severodonetsk um, uh, canal system. It goes all the way south towards Bakhmut. They're well past that. Now, some of the interesting things that have happened, and we'll get into this when we talk about what's the guy who replaced Siersky, Drapny. One of the reasons that Slavyansk, sorry, not Slavyansk, Seversk, which was the town that was basically the wall preventing the Russians from moving towards Slavyansk, because the Ukrainians are well aware, as good as a wall of urban entrenchment that the Slavyansk Kramatorsk Konstantinovka line is, they are all in a valley. And as we discussed on the last show that where we were featuring maps, and Seversk was very important for them to hold. Now they lost Seversk, I believe, in January or December. But Drapny apparently relocated troops from Seversk to Kupiansk or Liman, but I think it was Kupiansk. And that's, remember back then, we were, especially during the winter, we were talking about how, because the Russians are beginning to outnumber the Ukrainians, there's a bit of a whack-a-mole principle in place. You stop them here, you push them back a little bit there, but in another area they're making progress, and there just isn't enough troops to um, to foment some kind of a great counterattack and sweep them the other way.
Which is what you
It's
saw
it,
very much at the beginning of this year when you had a lot of localized Ukrainian successes, particularly in Zaporozhye.
yeah,
They are more than capable of tactical victories, but they are not capable of any sort of strategic shift of the front lines or the entire
yeah,
situation with the war. Hence, which we'll get into, the more aggressive drone attacks into Russia proper.
right, right. And I would add that they by prioritizing, I mean, they had to make a choice. Do we prioritize Zaporozhye and let the Russians go at a slightly faster pace in Sumy and Kharkov, particularly around Volchansk and Sumy, right? And to an extent, Kupiansk, but Kupiansk didn't work out for them. The Russians now control almost all of Kupiansk, and they've moved right to the Oskol River, which wasn't the case 3, 4 months ago. But it is kind of like an, the name just escaped me. The town just outside of Bakhmut. I was just talking about it. Uh, anyways, it's fallen silent. I don't hear a lot about what's going on in Kupiansk. So I guess what I'm saying is by prioritizing Zaporozhye, they lost Konstantinovka and to an extent Kupiansk.
Which is, if you look at it, it's a repeat of what exactly happened in summer, fall of 2024 with Kursk, where they were able to punch through. They had that very successful initial offensive, taking Suzhia, taking some of the surrounding settlements along
Hmm.
the border, but at the cost of, by the scale of this war, rapid Russian advance through Donbass cities.
Right, right. And to an extent, you saw that in the summer of 2023 when they got to Rabotino. But now the Russians are well above. They didn't just retake Rabotino; they're well above that. Um, Even if you compare the contours of the front line, you can see the distance between Donetsk and Zaporozhye is much shorter now, whereas before it was much longer, that southern line. Um, but anyways, so yes, and then we can finally move on to the blown up view supplied for us by South Front, which I think gives a little bit more clarity, especially about the question of Nikolaevka. The Russians are basically in the outskirts of Nikolaevka. Now, if they take it and they create a stronghold there, it doesn't mean it all falls apart, but it is a very strategic ground, and it must be taken before any further pressure can be applied on Slavyansk. Slavyansk and Kramatorsk are not small. The two of them together are well larger than, let's say, Bakhmut or Pokrovsk. They're just larger, and th- it won't be easy. But so that's why Nikolaevka is so important for the Russians. And that's it for the maps.
Well, once again, we have, I would say, close to what you could consider a crystal clear picture of the Ukrainian front lines. And the maps have definitely picked up from what they were even just a few weeks ago, where we are seeing a much more kinetic front right now. But once again, the story consistently with the Ukraine war, while the front line is paramount, don't get me wrong, but what we have seen in the broader picture of the Ukraine war has moved on to this, I guess you could call it attritional infrastructure warfare. And that's a combination of the recent drone strikes we've seen from Ukraine and in some cases NATO territory into Russia proper. And that's also combined with the Russian retaliations on the Black Sea ports, where they effectively have shut down Ukrainian shipping. And that, I'll start with the Black Sea ports because I think there's been a very interesting shift there. For those of you with long memories, such as I'd like to consider ourselves among that category, even though sometimes I question myself with that. But those of you who listen to this program probably have a little bit more longer of a memory when it comes to these topics than the average person certainly does. And you'll recall in 2023, summer 2023, there was a fierce debate over the Black Sea shipping lanes, particularly when it comes to grain shipments, because
Hmm.
they feared the second and third order effects of these grain shipments from both Ukraine and Russia not being able to make it out into the international markets and causing shortages really across the world, particularly with concerns in the so called global south, fearing that the nations of Africa and even some parts of the Middle East and Asia would have food shortages leading to famine, which would, of course, lead to a whole number of problems.
Refugees.
Yes, being among them on top of a number of different things, but refugees certainly, and
Yeah.
everything else that comes with that. And the Turks were very instrumental in brokering this deal. And at the same time, you also had China, India, and a lot of the so called BRICS nations and a lot of the neutral, non European nations who are willing to at least approach the Russians pragmatically. They all leaned pretty heavily on the Russians to accept this grain deal. And they did. And that was in place for the better
Yep.
part of 3 years there. But as one would expect, into these ports, in particularly Odessa, but also Nikolaev, other ports along the Black Sea, there were, of course, weapon shipments. And the as we've seen with every round of diplomacy for this war, but I really think since the beginning of Pax Americana, if you will, going back to 1991, the deal was not worth the paper it was written on. That there was never any intention of honoring it. There was never any intention of trying to come to some sort of long term agreement that would be of collective benefit to the world. And I'm not saying that in some sort of bleeding heart way, but I'm saying that in the sense that global stability when it comes to these vital sectors is uh, it, it's something that affects all of us in the most literal ways. And look, I'm of the opinion of a very harsh immigration policy. You know all of this. But that becomes a lot harder to manage. Number one, when your government isn't trying. And number two, when you have upheaval in some African or Asian nation that is undergoing an economic and food crisis. But putting that aside, you would think that beyond the great power competition, which I can accept that it's part of world history and we're no exception to that. But on top of that, they're unable to make, and this is particularly because of Washington and their vassals. I mean, I'm not saying the Russians and the Chinese have never did anything wrong, just to get all the qualifiers out of there. But we see the parties constantly breaking treaties are the Americans and whoever the Americans back. But you would think it would be in the collective interest of the great powers for some sort of framework to exist in that place, for some sort of agreement like these things, the grain shipments. And apparently the Russians agreed to that, the Chinese agreed to that, because we had a better part of that for 2 years. But almost as soon as the agreement was signed, before the ink was even dry, we have weapon shipments coming into Ukraine through Odessa. So naturally, the Russians, quite recently actually, it's been because of this recent wave of drone attacks, starting in 2026. Of course, they happened before then, but they really intensified into the beginning of 2026. That we've actually seen a retaliation against the ports of Odessa. And I have to say, this is really, once again, and I'll give the American strategic planners credit in this regard, a series of these damned if you do, damned if you don't decisions for the Russians, going all the way back to before the Maidan, but I think the Maidan is a good position with that. 2014, either they intervene in Ukraine in 2014, go in and deal with the consequences of that, or they kick the can down the road until 2022, like they actually did, and deal with the consequences of a Ukraine that has had 8 years of NATO training and armament. You have the grain deal where the Russians are supposed to be a party acting in good faith, making sure these shipments get onto the international market. You have that. But then the price they pay are weapons shipped in through these so called civilian vessels. But we've seen that they've made the choice to eventually start striking. but is it's this web of bad or worse decisions for the Russians. Like I said, I give the American strategic planners a lot of credit, just objectively speaking, in that regard. They are good at setting these traps. Now, they haven't been enough to, say, accomplish their goals. And it's also come at the price of their international credibility across the world. But the the deal's off, I guess. Looking at it, and it doesn't seem like
Yeah.
any of the neutral parties or the parties willing to play both sides, like say Turkey, are really willing to try to get this thing back online. And I mean, who can blame them at this point? Because it's obvious which way this war is going. That as far as a country like Turkey is concerned or India is concerned, it's better to try to negotiate with the Russians for a post-war settlement, uh, to work through what is soon going to be the shape of the world order versus what, say, the Americans had planned in 2014 and wait until 2022 to execute. But it also comes down to the Russians have been forced to effectively strike their own ports. I mean, they've built these things over a series of centuries, of course, modernized them over a number of years, going all the way back to the establishment of Odessa itself under the Russian Empire, all the way through the Soviet era, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So on top of having this grain deal torn up, which I would, as I'd said before, was really in the world's collective interest, and Russia included in that, but they're also being forced to effectively go scorched earth on their own territory once again
Yeah, it
because
was
the
something that they didn't want to do.
exactly, and you saw this throughout the war because even in the areas of Ukraine that they did not officially annex, outside of the four oblasts in Crimea, they were very hesitant to do the infrastructure strikes because there was a hope in Moscow, and an understandable hope, but perhaps a naive one, that Ukraine would be a neutral or maybe, if they're lucky, a Russian aligned state by the end of this crisis, and it would be in their own interest, in the interest of both sides, that the Ukrainians still had functional infrastructure and that the repair costs be kept to a minimum. But no, the Western powers backing Ukraine, particularly coming from Washington, to a lesser extent Brussels through both the European Union and NATO, have decided, and every time you hear them talk about how much they care about Ukraine, this is how you know that they're full of it, because they were willing to let Ukraine walk itself into a position. In fact, they actually pushed it into a position where the entire country is not only going to be demographically destroyed, but it's going to be destroyed infrastructurally, economically, in about just about every aspect you can imagine. When they realized that there was no way this war was going to collapse Russia or bring Putin to his knees or whatever, what they shifted to is how can we turn the Ukraine war into a black hole for Russia, even if that means the destruction of Ukraine as a nation itself. And that's what they got. So even when they do inevitably lose this, they have left the Russians to pick up the pieces, which, like I said, history will tell whether this war was worth it or not, even though the way I see it, Moscow was really left with no choice but to go in, given the circumstances in early
Yeah.
2022. But history will tell what the ultimate cost benefit of it is. That's something we'll have to wait years for. Maybe not even in my lifetime we'll know. But point being is they now have been effectively stuck with the bill for as much of Ukraine as they
Yeah.
actually end up taking, the four oblasts at least, the damage to Russia proper, and the areas that are, I suppose, going to remain under a pro-Russian influence depending on how the post-war settlement shakes out. And
It's one of the things I said even in the first year of the war. The Ukrainians are fine to a degree, because of course it's also a loss for Ukraine. But in a way, in the short term, as long as they believe that they will win, in the short term, they believe that as long as these are Russian areas, getting the Russians to destroy them as well as themselves, uh, any one of the four oblasts, right, will cause Russians to leave these areas. Which, of course, that has happened, but it has not happened to the degree that Ukrainians have left Ukraine outside of the four oblasts and Crimea. Not even it's not even measure it's not even worth measuring. But
I think the population,
psychologically for the Ukrainians, they're they're much less grieved to see Donetsk getting bombed, Lysychansk, uh, even Liman, which isn't fully recaptured by the Russians yet, or Kupiansk. For one, they all know that these areas were heavily pro-Russian, and just as Odessa was. But they would be much more grieved. Like if Lvov was hammered the way Odessa and Nikolaev are being hammered in the last 2 weeks, they would be much more grieved, right? But in the short term, like I said, they can deal with it because, hey, you know what? Those are areas with large Russian populations and people empathetic to the Russian side as opposed to the Ukrainian side. Although they're not vociferous about it, but the Ukrainians are well aware of this. So yeah, I think, and I said that'll be fine with them, even for their handlers, the Americans, the British. That's fine, right? Because the Americans and the British expect when this war is over that they're going to have. I mean, they would prefer Russia to lose, and they would go to 1991 borders. However, they would buy up this territory anyways, right? Like as they already have. I mean, before the war, we spoke about Ukrainian Jewish oligarchs owning much of everything in Ukraine, a population with less than 1% Jews. But other Jews in the West, Vanguard and BlackRock and all that. Are interested in these areas. I mean, they're not all Jewish companies, obviously, but there's various Western corporations that want the resources here very badly. And if who's going to rebuild these cities? Well, that's a good question, but I think for those Western corporations, they're looking at it. They're looking at the gas deposits. They're looking at the rare earth deposits.
Yes, the vaunted mineral deal.
The vaunted mineral deal, remember that? All that's nothing now. I mean, it was never anything anyways, but like at least there's no pretense of that. But I think we should mention just the kind of punishing strikes that the Russians have meted out to the Ukrainians in the last two
Before
weeks.
before you get into that, I do want to give
Sure.
context to one of the statements you made earlier about the Ukrainians willing to tolerate strikes more towards Odessa, Nikolaev, even places in the Donbass. By quoting the new Ukrainian army chief Drapati, his
Yes.
comments on the Donbass. These are his words, not mine. Criminals, migrants, and unconscious people, he said, describing his attitude to Donbass residents. They want handouts, they're envious, and don't want to work at all. I used to think it was a myth, but no, it's the truth. Mind you, that the Donbass, that part of eastern Ukraine, stretching all the way up into Kharkov, is the industrial heartland of Ukraine, the engine of its economy, mind you. But these are
It
the
is the dumbest thing. It is all projection.
Oh yeah, I mean, he's describing Lvov. He's describing Ivano-Frankovsk. He's describing these areas in the far western reaches of Ukraine that are up in the mountains that were on the fringes of the Habsburg territory for centuries. And like I said, nothing against these areas in the abstract, but once again, if you want to have this as your heart of Ukrainian nationalism, you've been the hinterland of the Poles and the Austrians for the past 300 years, and you wanted to say that the welfare parasites are the ones who are in the industrial heartland, the ones who are in the coastline, in the manufacturing areas, and the areas that actually could turn Ukraine into wealthy countries, the areas that when Ukraine has been united and joined with Russia, whether it was in the form of the Empire, the Soviet Union, had been really a powerhouse of whatever state was part of in terms of manufacturing and agriculture. And we have Drapati, who, judging by his name, is very Western Ukrainian. I could be wrong about that, but just judging by the sound of his name, is going to
Now
sit
it
there.
means in Russian it means like like to scatter away, to like skedaddle from somewhere, like
Oh, so what he's going to do
uh,
after the war?
yeah, I mean, it's a word that that it exists in both languages. It's not like some pure Ukrainian word. um we have a word similar to that, but it doesn't, I don't think it means the same thing. It's kind of like a false friend, but whatever.
Yeah,
That's neither here nor there.
but once again, this is the new chief of the Ukrainian army, and look, as far as I know, even with the language laws and with everything, and another tragedy of this war, and another war that makes it a real damned if you do, damned if you don't for the Russians, is that the bulk of the AFU is still made up of people from central and eastern Ukraine who are primarily Russian speakers. I could be wrong about that, but to my understanding, that is still the bulk of the AFU.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they are Russian speaking, but and of course, there's many probably that there's thousands who died not wanting necessarily um, to fight and die for the Kiev regime, for the coup government, but then there's also like a sizable number of Ukrainians that they're Russian speaking, but they identify as Ukrainians.
Yeah, that's where you get a lot of the Azov guys actually, and a lot of the
Yeah.
like really far western Ukrainian nationalists don't like Azov because of that. And to further your point there before we move on, that's what you get in that part of like central and eastern Ukraine where the identity is very fluid, where you can have those contradictory things. You can have somebody who's half their vocabulary is Ukrainian, but they consider themselves Russian, and that is the area when this war is over. The majority of the population is they're either going to be Ukrainian if the Ukrainians win, not going to happen, or they're going to be Russian if the Russians win.
Yeah, there is that too. I mean, it's very sad. I can only hope that uh, the majority of um of those speakers who didn't want to be part of the Ukrainian coup regime had the chance to leave, but I know many did not.
But the last thing I'll add to that, just to finalize the point before we move on to some of the other stuff here, particularly the drone attacks, is I keep in mind their parents' generations and even in their lifetime. While yes, there were distinctions between Russian and Ukrainians, it was really a distinction without a difference where these people lived side by side in the latter days of the Soviet Union, even into the early days of the Russian Federation and independent Ukraine. A lot of cross border travel in those parts, and a lot of them have family on one side or the other. And that's actually been a big part of this, where a lot of Ukrainians, either through being compelled to or being really just buying into the ideology, have blood relatives in Russia that they have completely cut off. Keep in mind, Siersky's family lives in Russia.
Yes, yes. But I think he married a Ukrainian woman. He's been in Ukraine ever since like 91.
Oh yeah, he cast his lots with them with the independence movement. Well, he wasn't a direct player in the independence movement, but he cast his lots with them post independence and worked his way up through a military career there. So
Yeah.
I don't question that he's pro Ukrainian despite whatever his ethnic background might be. But just to show once again the divisions of this war, and that yes, it really is a civil war, despite what many people would like to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just um look at the first guy that um um Zelensky fired, which was Fedorov, which is a Russian last name. Siersky is funny because he's Russian, yes, but the name goes back to Poland. I think it does because some Polish gentry settled in Kiev and they married local Ukrainians and Russians, and they adopted like the local identity, and they're like the name, yes, is from this origin, but they're obviously like not the same anymore. It's just been too long. um I mean, I personally know some Macedonians from the north that have Serbian last names, but they haven't been Serbian in a few generations, if
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
when you had these
Like,
empires and these super states, mixing of peoples in that regard was much more common and much more acceptable, and it was just easier for
Yeah.
in the days of the Commonwealth for a Pole to marry Ukrainian, or they in of the Empire of the Soviet Union for Russian Ukrainian cross marriages, and to the point where it wouldn't even be considered an interethnic marriage. It's just that uh, they're only slightly different than us, and that was understood pretty much everywhere. What east of Kiev for up until I don't know up until the Maidan really.
Hmm. Yeah. So yeah, and there's an interesting point because I want to talk a little bit more about Zelensky's reasons for why did he get rid of Fedorov, and who is Drapati, and what are their connections to the West, and so forth and so on. I'll begin with Fedorov, if that's okay with you.
No, go ahead.
So, Fedorov is a 30-something guy. You can see videos of him speaking to Karp, with the tech bros from the U.S. Karp is obviously Jewish.
See,
I
Palantir
don't
is
know
going
if
to save the West after destroying the far right in Europe and supporting Ukraine. All part of the
yes,
plan.
that's how we went back to West, and because as Karp said, he would if his family didn't leave Germany, or maybe it was Austria, but if they didn't leave Europe, he would have been a lampshade. He literally said that
Oh
in a
yes,
recent
and for anyone listening in, you can look that up. His words, not ours.
yeah, he would have become a meme. So, anyways, um, I think the reason Zelensky got rid of him isn't because, we just don't know Ukrainian politics well enough, or haven't looked into the hype of this or that figure. I think the drone warfare against Russia by Ukraine was supposed to achieve several different things. And it's the same things that have always been the goal. And that was to destabilize Russia to the point that Russians themselves get rid of Putin and someone else comes in that has a radically different approach, right? This is why the US and Europe was so hard against those Russian Jewish oligarchs, because they felt like if they punished them, then they could threaten Putin, and Putin would have to go along with them. Now, that has never happened, even before this war and during this war. This war is 4.5 years old now. Uh, and it still hasn't happened, and I don't think it will happen. To get back to the
No, in
strikes,
fact, a lot of those people have left Russia.
yes, yes, along with those same people who are not that rich, but are ultimately of the same tribe. But
Yeah,
you can see
we've
it.
talked about this. About a quarter of the Jewish population has left Russia since 2022.
Yeah. So, and attitudes towards Jews in Russia are much more negative now. But that said, uh, I think the whole point of Fedorov's drone warfare puts into relief his discrepancy with Svirsky's approach. Now, we've talked for ages about Ukraine's manpower shortage issues. We've talked about draft dodgers. We've talked about soldiers going AWOL. The numbers aren't sufficient, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, Fedorov was partly responsible for reconfiguring the TCC, the TSS, the guys who go around in the vans and grab men off the streets, to go down in the front in a month or so. So
Who get beat with the shovels in Odessa?
yes, and so so um, you can see Fedorov's approach. He's thinking we can't afford to throw any more bodies in the meat grinder. So therefore, we have to attack the Russians till it really, really hurts them, right? We're going to attack all their major refineries. They hit almost all of them except for a handful or something. And as it turns out, one of the reasons that they are actually able, and I say one of the reasons, not all the reasons, that they're able to hit so far is they have begun using weather balloons to launch the drones.
Huh.
I saw a video, I saw somebody write it up. It's from a Ukrainian source. How often did they do that? That's why I say it's not, I'm sure it's not the only way they've done this.
I mean, it makes
But it is,
conceivable sense, but
yes. So, um, but then you look at Reuters, you look at Bloomberg, and Russia's still making better profits on the sale of gas and oil than they were in 2025 or 2024 and 2023. And 2023 was one of their best years because, of course, Europe was going to go off of Russian energy supplies. But in order to do that, they had to buy a ton of it. Now they're still buying gas from the Russians. In fact, they broke last year's record, and only about half the year has been done. So, um, so Fedorov's approach was, we're going to use drones. Look, it's better than just wasting all these men. Sirski's approach is drones can help, but destroying wild berries, their equivalent of Amazon, or ozone. Now, ozone is another story because wild berries in ozone, for people who don't know, are like their equivalent of Amazon in Russia. However, wild berries is completely Russian owned. I believe it's a man and a woman, not related to each other, two separate um, owners, investors who are Russian. But ozone, well, ozone has the Dutch bank involved. It has America's Vanguard, BlackRock. It has
all of your
several,
favorites.
all of your favorites. It has British companies. So it is not, it's unlikely. I mean, they have to be really desperate to attack them, right? Because it would go against like their own interests. I'll read you some other. So Norges Bank, UBS of Switzerland, HSBC, um, and Alfred Berg, Swedish Capital Management, KBC of Belgium. All these are stakeholders in ozone. But Wildberries is owned by Tatiana Kim Bakalchuk, which is a Ukrainian name, and something called the Rus Group, which is the 35% owner, LLC STIN. I don't know what that means. Russian companies controlled by Russian Rus Group. Anyways, so the whole point of Fedorov's approach was, let's drive the Russian population crazy. They're going to get sick. Let's make them sick of the war sooner. Um, and of course, they also attacked a lot of civilians. And I would say that the attacks are not as frequent as they were. The attacks on refineries have significantly reduced in the last 10 days. The emphasis on wildberry warehouses is about the same. Now they've attacked 6 warehouses stretched across from southern Russia to Moscow to St. Petersburg. Um, it's, I mean,
Just look at a
hundreds of
population density
millions of
map of Russia.
dollars. Yeah, some American estimates are that 1.5 billion dollars has gone up in smoke, literally. Uh, so it's not like, I don't want to, but it still won't win you the war. especially when Russia is making, even with like all the seaborne interdiction of the Russian so-called shadow fleet, has not dented the economy. Even with the gas shortages, what has ended up happening is India is buying more oil and refining it and selling it back to the Russians. But the Russians are able to afford it because the prices are going up. And the 21st sanction package is dreaming up this idea that they can force Russia, and they can force, of course, third parties who are buying Russian oil for $44 a barrel. Nobody's going to do that. Uh,
Well,
I
it's
hate to
okay
break it to you.
because the legacy of the late Lindsey Graham is going to get those bone crushing sanctions passed on both sides of the Atlantic. I guarantee you that.
Yeah.
They're having his funeral this week. How could they not agree to it?
Yeah. Oh, it's going to be huge, like the Ayatollahs.
Zelensky and
But it's about
Netanyahu
freedom.
are going to be meeting.
Yeah. So so um that is a discrepancy between two entirely different approaches. Fedorov is young. Western media likes him. He appeals to young people. Almost all the protesters were young, mainly women. There were some men, but mainly women. And as I said in the last show, all these homemade cardboard signs means that they were caught off foot,
Also, not
which
in
means
English.
also not in English. So, yeah, they were all in Cyrillic. And what that tells you is they did not expect Zelensky to do this. And it is their protest that forced them to get rid of Sirski. Now, I think that kind of demonstrates not just Zelensky's predicament, but I think his own ideas, given whatever amount of power he may or may not have, that losing territory for him is still important, that it doesn't happen, which is why he was willing to get rid of Fedorov and not Sirski. He only got rid of Sirski because he did not want a backlash. It is at this point that he becomes afraid of another, let's say, military celebrity swooping in. But not up until this point. That's not the reason why he got rid of him. Because the drone attacks on the refineries and then later on the warehouses did not create the environment that they were looking for. Remember that they also contacted guys in 2023 that were in Wagner about, taking over the Russian government, right?
Yes,
So
I do remember that.
so they're always going to look at getting the Russian people to do the work for them, right? The difference I would say in 2026 is Russians hate Ukrainians far more. In fact, they still didn't hate Ukrainians in 2022, 2023, 2024. But I think by 2025 and 2026, especially in 2026, they loathe them. And not least of which is their attacks on civilians. So, in the Krasnodar area along the Black Sea, this is an area southeast of Crimea. I suppose it's somewhere near Anapa or Gelendzhik. The Ukrainians actually flew drones all that way to kill civilians at the beach. And they killed 12 of them, and 4 of them were children under 10. So this is
Which is
not a,
nothing
it's
new
not
going back to
isolated.
2014.
Yes. Now, I remember there were 4 more people that were killed, I think, in Lugansk this week. Another gentleman was killed in Belgorod. If they can't get a military vehicle, they will immediately zone in on civilians. And sometimes it's just civilians. And Fedorov actually admits this, that has to happen. Same thing with Drapati, of course. Um, Now, a little bit about Drapati. So Drapati goes all the way back to 2014 after the Maidan coup. He was one of those guys that would go in with the nationalists like Azov, but also nationalists from Western Ukraine, to try to overthrow the Donbass separatists, right? And incidentally, I would say one of the reasons the Russians didn't go in 2014, and there's other reasons, but just one of them is I think they were surprised to see how well the militias, the Donbass militias, were able to resist, and like a real army. Like both, you can't argue, both sides, both the West and Russia were supplying weapons to each camp, but I mean, the Ukrainians far outnumbered them. So in any case, and of course this is before the drone era, so it was a different kind of war, the last of its kind, you could say. And so um Drapati is Mihailo Drapati is his full name. He's fighting here. Now, I believe he was captured. There's photos of him in the summer where he was captured, and he was let go. Probably again, like part of the litany of Putin's stupid decisions. Of course, there was and the two that I would center in on from that era. One was in 2014, the other was in 2015. Now, concerning the point I'm bringing up about Drapati, is he is captured in a photo after being taken prisoner, and it is summer foliage. You can see his shirt is unbuttoned to a degree. He's a bit roughed up. He's thinner than he is now, not much, but a little bit thinner. And I wouldn't doubt it if that was the battle of Ilyevoysk, which is south of Donetsk city, because of course Merkel came in and said, please, please, don't kill them all, because they killed a lot of them. Let them go, because no, of course they fled without dropping their guns, and there are videos of them getting hit very hard by the Russians, fleeing with their guns. Of course, Drapati was captured, so I'm guessing that's where it happened. Of course, the other one was Debaltsevo, which was a huge defeat for the Ukrainians, because they were on the verge of separating Lugansk from Donetsk, the two major cities, by the town of Debaltsevo. So, but that didn't work out. But again, of course, the Merkel intervened to stop, because of course there were all kinds of American and Western mercenaries helping out, CIA, et cetera, et cetera, and of course a lot of volunteers for based Ukraine. So that is Drapati's career really begins from the start of this, new Ukraine post Maidan. That's where it begins. Now he's famous for stopping the Russian advance in the Kharkov Volchansk area. Okay, the Russians made the biggest gains that time in 2024 until the Russians captured something like 214 square kilometers, then another 40 or 50 the next day, and then it slowed down, right? And the Russians became bogged down in Volchansk. Yes, they've regained that territory and more, but it took, a year and a half to do it. And of course, Syrskyi, by contrast, decided to go even bigger and go into Kursk. So the party was successful in that regard, but he almost resigned, and he's very clever. He almost resigned because back in I believe 2025, he was in charge of I believe the 58th Motorized Infantry Brigade. This was in the Dnepro Petrovsk region, north of Dnepro city, and Zarichne. Now, this was a mass casualty event for the Ukrainians in June 2025. One of the last kind of mass casualty events that we saw during the war. This is why it's so neither. I mean, both sides from time to time will try to make a breakthrough with heavy mechanized equipment, and it never works out. In any case, so estimates range anywhere from like 25 dead to 100 dead, 100 to 400 wounded, but it was a mass casualty event. And somehow he decided to blame upper command for this and criticized them for never learning from their mistakes. And now I don't know if he was just following orders. I don't know if he said that I'd rather not do this, but it happened. So I have no idea who most of the blame should be squared on, but that is one of the things that was kind of an infamy that happened a year later after successfully blocking the Russians in Volchansk. Um, so that is now who has replaced Sirski. Now, Drapati is also familiar with and likes Fedorov. Fedorov, according to Zelensky, was offered various other posts, almost any other post he could want, and Fedorov said no. So I think it's very interesting that both these men, with their different approaches on how to fight this war, have been let go. In a way, it means that, of course, it's a transitional period, but it's uncertain how they're going to fight this war going forward, right? Um, I saw a write up in a Western newspaper about Russia's extending defenses around Moscow. There's another circle of defense that they've put up there. Now, there are still attacks on Russian refineries, but if we're going to talk about attacks on Ukrainian sites, Ismail, which is one of the ports in the Odessa Oblast, Odessa proper, Yuzhny, Nikolaev, and the Kherson region, and other ports, they are totally hammered. Now, today, one of the boats that the Russians hit has sunk or is about to sink. It is only 1/3 of the boat that is still not capsized. Um, Now, this is the hitting is so thorough that Maersk, the largest cargo shipping company in the world, no longer since July of 22 is making any more trips to Odessa or anywhere in the Black Sea, and this is true for the other um, shipping companies. So Russia is still hitting in Sumy and Chernogov power supply stations. They're still hitting gas stations. Over 250 now gas stations have been destroyed. They're still hitting Kiev. Now, interestingly, they hit a town just south of Kiev. And this was one of the craziest stories because, well, the people that ended up dying. Um, let me just find oh, I should here's something else I should mention. So Drupati has very strong links with Britain for a
Remind you of
long
anyone?
time. Yes. So and by the way, Mihailo Drapati is 43 years old now. In 2021, uh, the British ambassador to Ukraine, Melinda Simmons, personally presented to Drapati the Queen's Sword at a graduation ceremony of Ukraine's National Defense University for the top graduate. He actually accepted the sword kneeling before the ambassador. So I know. Um,
You know what? That's the greatest story since Mussolini got the Sword of Islam.
Great Britain, you are my best friend.
Uh, are
So
are you telling me that the Ukrainians are to the Brits what the Albanians are to America?
maybe,
That's what's feeling like
maybe
right now.
this doesn't it. So so Russians have been striking cargo ships, tugboats, everything. Everything is being struck. And there is now, I don't know if it's already happened, but there were plans for a UN Security Assembly meeting to address this, which is rich, right? Because that's what the Ukrainians have been doing for all of June, parts of July, and late May. But uh, when they get it in return, when they like, we can go up the escalation ladder, but you're not allowed to. So I will get to that part about the people that have that have been killed in this recent attack. I believe it was just like 2 or 3 days ago. Maybe it was on the 22nd or the 23rd of July. I will get to it. Give me a second. Yeah, so here's a few. Uh, Colonel Edward Sirenko, an officer of both the SBU and the GUR, was killed in a strike on a military training ground in Kiev region during a weapons exhibition. Now, this is hilarious because this was, I mean, it's another mass casualty event, and it's, you'd think they would have learned from this. Now, there were also foreigners that were there that were presenting their new drones and other munitions and armaments for Ukraine. So he was killed. He was previously head of the SBU Special Operations Center for Counterterrorism and coordinated the Ukrainian Alpha Unit activities in Iraq in 2018. He was detained in connection with organizing a criminal group with Ukrainian media at the time, referring to him as a former SBU employee. Here, I'll send you the um, this photo, or these two photos of him.
Oh, this
Now,
guy. Okay.
yeah. Now he's not the only one. There were some pretty important people who were killed, but the real kicker is
Remember, Lindsey Graham had a
one.
heart attack, though.
Yeah, he had a heart attack. But the really crazy part is the one guy that didn't go because he said, I had a feeling something like this was going to happen. I have to find you the. Okay, now, Valentina Savitskaya was also killed. I'll send it to you. There were other people. I just obviously this is number 5 of the various people. Katerina Shalupnya was also killed. She was the legal department of the Association of Secretariat of at the UAROR team member. Valentina was deputy head of the Center of International Cooperation and Strategic Command. Bogdan Milishin, not a particularly public man. I'll send you a picture. Worked with the Save Ukraine Now Foundation, which cooperates with units from the Carpathian regions of Ukraine. You know, the guys that help, but that don't necessarily go to the front,
Oh, of
unless they're
course.
Hungarian, of course,
Yes.
right? The casualties from the strike are now slowly being released. Alexander Gordienko, a firmware developer for Ukraine, was killed. I'll send you that one. So these are people I'm sure that are like in the news. Um, but I am trying to get to that one where I forget his name. That's why I want to find it. Who said, I didn't go because maybe now of course their journalists are saying, even on Ukrainian Telegram channels, saying like Yulia Kuryenko saying also reports that the true casualty numbers are much higher than 10, with a lot of people killed, likely torn apart into molecules. Not my words, which explains why dogs are working at
Vaporized.
the scene. Yeah, vaporized. Um, yeah, regarding yesterday, so this was on the, I believe, on the 24th. Yeah, so it's very recent. Ballistic missile for the Armada Company. Now this is hilarious because, of course, a week or so earlier, there were munitions stored in a town just outside of this town, both just south of Kiev, that blew up like half the neighborhood because it was filled with munitions.
Well, I still love this idea of having a weapons expo in a country in the middle of a very, very hot war that has been
It's
defined
insane.
in the past several months by precision strikes. If I
Yeah.
didn't know any better, I would think that these people were invited for a very particular reason, but I'm not going to speculate that much.
Yeah, that's right. You know, there's that conspiracy angle they were told to go. Um, yeah, so
The,
maybe
it's
I
a shame
won't find it
Zelensky
in the
wasn't there.
interest.
They could have used his morale building skills.
Yeah, I'm so sorry I can't make it.
He has to go beg the Europeans for more money.
Yeah, I have begging duties. I'm sorry I can't make it.
Ugh. I,
Yeah, so sorry I can't find it, but oh no.
can you
Oh
give?
yeah, yeah. So here
Oh,
it is. Here it is. Here it is. His name is Sergei Pogreb Pogrebetsky. Let me remind you, this is written. Oh yeah, so this no, it was by Sergei, a different Sergei, Sergei Flesh. He says, the other Sergei says, let me remind you, this is written by an advisor to President Zelensky on social media. He boasts that he suspected the risks, so he didn't go to today's exhibition. That is, yesterday or the day before yesterday, he didn't put in a single ounce of effort to avoid today's casualties. He didn't try to cancel or postpone the exhibition to another date, but with a higher degree of security. This is a disgrace to the entire institution of Zelensky's state power. Remember last year in Sumy, they also had an exhibition that the Russians hit. And again, the figures were could be 25 dead, could be 75 dead. No one
I
knows,
don't know. There's something
right?
worse
And they're
about it
and they're
being
not
in
going to tell
Sumi.
you. Yeah. So yeah, yeah. And I just I like, why are you doing this? Like, I mean, at least do it further west, right? Like, at least do that. And of course, this brings up the other problem. Um, it's been weeks since America has shipped Patriot missiles to Ukraine, and the Russians are able to hit Ukraine, anywhere in Ukraine, uh, almost completely unimpeded,
Anytime
including
too.
Kiev, anytime, anytime. And so now the Russians are destroying Ukrainian warehouses like the Nova Poshta, and they have another one, Epizone or something like this, or Epicenter. That's another group that they've targeted. So everything that the Ukrainians have done now is coming back onto them.
Imagine that. It's as if they were set up for this. That the West has not a damn to give about the outcome of Ukraine, even that so long as it can be used to set back the Russians until we can send in the rest of the Europeans, Ukraine has done its job, as was the case since day one.
Right. And you know what kills me is, right, like, everybody knows, like, I mean, I know they're like the West and America are playing like this kind of Hail Mary strategy, like, let's just extend this war. Maybe, we'll get an idea, maybe something will develop, right? Who knows? But the funny thing is, um, like, if you really, I mean, if Russia is really a a paper tiger, and Putin has no red lines, you could have sent in, I don't know, let's say 10 battalions. Maybe you won't, you know, um, push the Russians out. You're not going to achieve 1991 borders, but you could make life very difficult for the Russians. Instead of capturing 4 or 5 cities in 2 years, to capture two, right? That could wear them down, but they're not willing to do that. They're just, and I think there's several reasons. There's not just one, but I think they know their public hates them. Whether you're talking about Britain or Belgium, France or Germany, on some level, the public does not trust the authorities, or there's a sizable amount that don't. They definitely don't believe they should die for Ukraine. I think that's one of the reasons. Escalation is another one, I'm sure. That they're not ready for it. If it happens, that could be a reason. Um, Also, that if escalation meets hate for them, which could happen, I think they're afraid of very dire outcomes, and very sudden dire outcomes. So,
Yeah, I really can't add much more to that. I think you summed it up pretty well. Now, I do want to say, broader, looking at everything we've talked
mm,
about, and this will bring us into some of the news about Iran. With the drone strikes, with Fedorov, with Sirski, with Trapati, with all these people, that of course you're seeing some level of decision making on the part of Ukraine, on the part of Zelensky. They do have that. But at the end of the day, general strategy is set through Washington. Now
mhm,
it can be delegated through the European proxies. It can be delegated through the British, the French, Germans, etc. But at the end of the day, this is all coming from Washington, and we've seen this with Trump's recent statements. We've seen this with, I mean, hell, the Ukrainians are even striking Iranian tankers now. We'll get into that in just a moment.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
But with all that being said, I go back to one of my fears that the Americans, that the plan out of Washington right now is a scorched earth campaign on the rest of the world with the belief, either rightly or wrongly, correctly or erroneously, that the Americans can weather the storm if the global economy, particularly the global energy market, is thrown into chaos. And I'll talk about that in a little bit because I was actually listening to a Tucker Carlson interview of all people, and there's some interesting things that were brought up about the energy markets that I'll get into when we talk about Iran. But
mhm.
the strikes on refineries, the strikes on even some of the oil fields themselves, even though it's been mostly focused towards the refineries in Russia, serves a dual strategy if you're somebody in Washington sitting here going over the strategies that we've talked about, particularly always going back to Mackinder. You get a 3-in-1 if you hit the Russian oil facilities and the Russian
Yeah.
refineries. You damage the Russians, you also cut off flow to the Chinese and the Europeans. And you prevent any of those power blocks from really being able to solidify themselves with energy independence. And then, even though it's not working, the strategy, the idea at least, is you go into Iran. Now, of course, there are plenty of Zionist interests there. I'm not going to downplay that. That's probably the main reason we're there. But
Mhm.
secondarily, it's about getting to control the oil flow out of the Persian Gulf. Now, they failed spectacularly at that, but that was the goal in mind. And when you have that, you have a Europe that is increasingly independent on North American energy, and with Trump's feud with Canada, it's mostly about getting more of a share in the Canadian energy market. Uh,
That, I'm sorry, it just cracks me up. I
yeah,
just
no, it is all ridiculous, but ultimately, it's funny because he's pursuing what is really just regular American strategy, just with none of the optics. Where we're going to commandeer Canadian energy because that is our lever of power over the Europeans to get them to bend to our will and to cut them off from Russian energy, so we can blow up all the Nord Stream pipelines that we want. It really does come back to that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So they have the Europeans dependent, they have the Russians rationing, and then they have the Chinese cut off. And I'm not saying it's that strategy in particular, but it is something approximating that where we get in Fortress North America to have the energy prices. Sure, us plebs might have to ration. We might have to line up at the gas station. If your license plate ends in an even number or a vowel or whatever stupid rule they establish, you get gas today. Sorry, your grocery prices are going to go up. Sorry, your heating bill's going to go up. But you know what? The American empire, in this very dilapidated, degraded, and degenerate form, is going to continue until I 79-year-old boomer am in the grave. So it's okay because I'll get to live through the last days of the American Empire, and you get to pick up the pieces. And that seems to be what the general
Yeah, yeah,
strategy is right now.
yeah. What does the boomer want?
Uh,
Essentially,
yeah, it comes down to that. Well,
can
it,
we ask them what is hi boomer? What would you like?
I mean,
It's-
well, let's be realistic. Now, I am under no illusion that Donald Trump is the sole policymaker. Far from. In fact, he's more of the figurehead than anything who executes the policies that are put on his desk. But let's just look at something. Donald Trump is 79 years old. He is not in the best health, to my understanding. He's,
Mhm.
I don't know how much overweight, but I know that the medical reports consistently say that his mind is not as sharp as it used to be. Realistically, and this is just normal to say, I think he's actually 80 now. I think he just turned 80. But how much longer does an 80-year-old man have to live? And how much longer is he going to think about those consequences? Especially with the time he grew up, the culture, the generation. It's not like the 80-year-olds of 80 years ago, where they are much more forward thinking. Many of them do have a concept of the eternity. Many of them do have a concept of the future beyond them, and think that um, whatever religious belief they might happen to belong to, that, hey, even after I die, there's going to be consequences for what I've done. Where I don't think you get that so much, even from a lot of the self-professed religious people in um, most of the world right now. And I'm saying, sometimes I'm no exception. I'm not going to sit here and morally grandstand about that. But in general, especially with the ruling class we have right now, even from a religious or secular perspective, there seems to be no forward thinking beyond their own lifespan, which is not how you manage an empire. And that's how it collapses. And as I see right now, in Washington, it looks like they are of the hubristic opinion that if we can just go scorched earth on everyone else, Fortress North America will somehow succeed. We can retrench, and then we can have another century of American domination, while apparently not considering any of the strategic fallout, any of the second and third order effects of what these policies might be. And that even though you're living comfortably, if you nuke the North American economy to the point where people are having to start rationing fuel, and I'm talking worst case scenario, I'm not saying this is definitely going to happen, but worst case scenario, you've destroyed the base of your own power, in which case it's useless, and everything you did was for
Yeah,
nothing.
yeah. I mean, I think it's beyond them. They're not. They're just not going to pay attention.
No, and I,
You
I
know.
think that, yes, we've discussed the ulterior motives, and I'll be the first to call out the Zionist lobby and everything entailing that. We'll get into that with Iran.
Hmm.
But also, I think that the establishment is actually, at least in some parts, a lot less cynical than we gave it credit for, to the point where they have perpetuated their own propaganda for so long they're starting to think it's true.
Yeah.
Which is a risk of any system, because any system is going to have propaganda, and you listen to it enough, it's going to be true. And I mean, I suppose the ultimate example, even though this is probably a fabricated story, but it's a popular tale. I'll use it to prove my point. Is the idea that apparently Mussolini fell for the fascists fix the timetables on the trains? Like I said, I don't think that's true. It's probably a post hoc myth, but it gets the point across.
Yeah, my one of the apparently there's a video about this, but the story of just to elaborate a little more on the boomers is this a son who knew his father had several cars and he wanted some other car, and he sold one of his cars for like next to nothing at the dealership, and he's just wowed. It's on Facebook. He says, I got $3,000 for this. It's my down payment on my new car. And the son goes, really could have used that car. I would have given you a lot more than 3,000. But like, there's just, I mean, they are just part of that, I don't know, consumer culture world.
I mean, look, I'll say just objectively, not to defend, not to criticize. They came of age in an unusually prosperous era, especially as far as human history is concerned. And
Yeah.
that as a result of that, I think many of them never did quite grasp forward thinking. Like, to go back to the ancient metaphor, well, how are we going to survive winter? But I mean that on a civilizational scale. How are we going to survive civilizational winter? And because they
Were
came of
boomers the
age.
first? Sorry, were boomers the first generation that started to send like their elderly parents to you know old folks' homes?
Yeah, and
Like,
as far as I
because that tells
understand,
a lot, right?
yeah, as far as I understand, that came with the gradual, even as far as Anglo civilization concerned, the moving down to the more granular unit of society, the suburbanization, if
Yes,
you will.
started long ago.
And yeah, I mean, there's decades, if not a century or more, history on that. But no, you bring up a good point with that, to the point where the institutionalization of the retirement home coming about in that past 80 years, I think, says a lot.
Yeah, because I mean, I think part of it is modernity. I think part of it is also the culture. It's not just one or the other. There's something about industrialization that like emboldened women and feminism that couldn't have happened before, because what were your options before industrialization? You know, you weren't going to work in a coal mine.
No.
Um, and I think the same thing, as you said, and so rightly said, the further granulization of the family unit into ever smaller parts
And that's already coming from
is part of this as well.
the Northwestern European stock that founded America, who, I mean, going back to Emmanuel Todd, already had much more granular family units than the rest of Europe.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's a further atomization on top of a previous atomization.
Yeah.
I love it when we can go on diatribes that end up with Emmanuel Todd being brought up. Hey, look, you get this nowhere else. I'm gonna have to learn French, aren't I? Because I want to read Defeat of the West, but it's, as far as I know, there's still no English translation. If anyone knows of
I
one,
heard you can get it in PDF.
I might just
You
have
can get
to.
it in PDF.
I might have to compromise and do that. But that's good to know. But I suppose with all of this, this does bring us to the topic of what I believe I'm going to title this episode. This is going to sound kind of stupid if I change my mind. The Persian Carousel. And it looks like we're off again. And it's time to decrease the strikes. It's time to shore up the economy. Time to agree an agreement, because we've obliterated Iran's navy for what, the 10th time at this point.
he
I've lost
never
track.
he never deviates from that message. Oh yeah, we've destroyed them. No ships getting through.
They're a week away from a nuclear weapon, but Operation Midnight Hammer was a success. I I think it was Daniel Davis who went through and actually quantified the number of times he said all of these statements in some
Yes,
form.
and it's an extraordinary number.
I mean, because he's been saying it practically every day since the end of
Yeah,
February, so it's going to add up.
we defeated Iran. I- Is he trying to shore up a situation where he leaves and says, "Yeah, of course we left. We defeated them."
I hope so. That would be. Look, I mean, this entire thing has been a disaster, but let me just say, one of the funniest outcomes would be if Trump has to get out in a face-saving way and pin this all on the
Honestly,
Israelis.
that's the best way, and
Yeah.
he
It,
he really is creative with these.
where he claims victory, he bombs another compound, I don't know, maybe another school, and declares victory, goes home, and then pins it all on Netanyahu. That would be the funniest outcome of all of this. But I have my doubts that's going to be the case.
It would be the most anti-Semitic thing Trump has ever done.
And you know what? That's a very low bar, because he. Well, no, I'm sorry. That's a. Yeah, that is a low bar, because he hasn't done much in the way of anti-Semitism, despite what some people might
No,
tell you.
isn't one of his divorced sons he's marrying a Jewish woman?
His one son, Donald Trump Jr., who married a Gentile, got divorced, and is now engaged to a Jewish woman in some sort of
Oh
relationship. I
yeah,
don't know whether they've made it
the kids are
official
going to
or.
be raised Presbyterian. You just know
Well, I mean,
that.
what's the difference?
Oh, ouch. Ouch.
But I'm getting off track here. Yeah. So far, I mean, his one daughter by the second wife nobody can ever remember married some like Lebanese guy. So I suppose keeping it Semitic at least there's that at least. I don't know if that quite counts. I mean that must be a fun family dinner. You know, you got the Jewish son-in-law, the Lebanese one. I'm sure they get along just fine. But for starters, Ukraine has officially joined the West. They're now fighting Israel's war, and they hit an Iranian tanker. So we did it. We won. But in all seriousness, I think we're coming to the point where we're seeing a merging of the fronts. I mean, these always have been extensions of the same overall war. I don't think
Yeah,
that we've ever
yeah.
been under any illusion about this. The Gaza war to a lesser extent, but once this spread out to Iran in particular, it was clear that obviously there's Zionist interests, and the Zionists, of course, want the American empire perpetuated because that's their guarantor. That's their cash cow. That is why they're around, because without the American empire, they don't exist. So it is all one and the same. So they want,
Yeah, remember, Ukrainians were in Afghanistan working with the Americans. They were in Iraq. Um, in fact, just to bolster your point, um, some Ukrainian operatives have been arrested in Iraq.
yeah, let's.
Um, Now, the reason for this is there was an attack, I believe, on a Saudi oil field. And the of course we all know like the Shia factions in Iraq have attacked these fields, as have the Houthis, because they have, of course, um, attacked the port of a pipeline. They've hit three Saudi cargo ships containing oil. And there's no one there counter being able to counteract them, including the Saudis and the mercenary armies of the Saudis. So it could be that the Ukrainians are doing this in order to like escalate the war. I mean, obviously, I think what Zelensky is doing by attacking this Iranian vessel, I mean, this attack cannot happen without America's approval.
No, of course not. America's approval and America's logistics. Those are the two big ones.
Yeah, there's no way this happens without their help and without their approval. But um, I would say Zelensky's happy about this because Ukraine gets to be in the news. You know, he's in Britain now, and he's expected to be in Washington tomorrow for Graham's funeral. But
Yes. You see, Graham had to be sacrificed because we needed a response to the Ayatollah's funeral. It's the only one we could think of to the only figure as monumental. I bet there's going to be 4 million people.
Imagine if someone told me in 2025 that in 2026 Iran was going to shame America with a more impressive funeral. It's so bizarre when you think about it. It's just so crazy.
uh, it is all very stupid, but you know what? That's why I'm here.
Oh my God. It's I keep thinking about it and it just destroys me. It's so bizarre. It is so weird, but here we are.
Yep. But you know what? It's all gonna be okay because Laura Loomer is going to solidify the Ukrainian-Israeli axis. She's going to spearhead us into the United Western Front against third worldism. That so long as we're civic nationalists with H1Bs and take in all the people that Israel won out of the Middle East into our countries, it's gonna be okay.
Hmm.
Because have a first worldist coalition, including Ukraine. Ukraine's the linchpin in that. So, we're all online. But getting back seriously, when it comes to Zelensky and possibly Ukrainian operations in some of these uh, Israeli projects to a limited extent. It's exactly what he wanted. He wanted Ukraine to join the West. He wanted to join NATO. Well, this is part of the package. And going back to February, March, remember, despite all the European hemming and hawing and them kicking the can down the road, they ultimately provided the logistic support for the Americans to launch long range strikes, launch long range aircrafts into Iran
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
supplement the loss of the Gulf bases because the Gulf bases were rendered inoperable because the Iranians effectively had them pinned down. And as it stands right now, there's really no sign that beyond the skeleton crews that are there right now that we're going to be able to go back to those bases. So they're going to continue launching B2s. They're going to continue these long range strikes from their European bases while the Europeans, I don't know, do some sort of mealy mouth like, oh, we think that the Iranian regime is bad and diplomacy and we can get a deal, blah, 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 while ultimately kissing Washington's feet at the end of the day on everything because that's how it always works out. But it's okay because the frequency of strikes on both sides has gone down. Sure, the Houthis are uh, raising the war banner again, quite literally, on top of figuratively, and are harassing traffic from the Red Sea, which is going to stymie markets beyond what they have been, energy markets, energy supplies, on top of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. But now all of a sudden you have Trump coming out today doing his little song and dance. We're having very good talks to the Iranians, and that uh, we're interested in going back to a framework, and that we had a peace deal, but in order to get to the peace deal, we need to pull out of the peace deal so we can negotiate a better deal. Because it's all art of the deal. Because I had a book ghostwritten in the '80s about my business success before it all fell apart in the '90s.
We should mention. So it was America that led the way in the reduction of attacks, which
Yes, yes.
the Iranians followed, I would say, roughly 12 to 18 hours later. Um, the other thing that's important to mention is America has lost another THAAD system. Remember, they only had like three. Did they not bring a THAAD over from South Korea,
Oh, they
right?
did. And
They did, right? So these are their most expensive and most sophisticated um, air defense radar that they have. Now, other radars have been destroyed as well. It's reported that America's running out of M9Q or the Reaper drones.
yeah, FQ9s.
Yes. Now an F-15 was destroyed, but then there was a warehouse in Saudi Arabia which contained several. I mean, you get wild figures, but like it's safe to say that America in the last 5, 6 days has lost somewhere between, I would say, 10 to 18 aircraft, roughly speaking. You could argue it's more, but you cannot argue it's less than 10. Um, and of course, they lost another Patriot system. Um, uh,
Well, if you want an idea
Along
of
with
how
the
bad it's getting, I saw a story where not only a Patriot missile system was moved from Greece to Saudi Arabia, but apparently is still being operated by Greeks. So they're pulling once they are pulling NATO into this war.
wow. Yeah, so just in these last 2 weeks, they've lost something like three Patriot systems. They've lost one or two HIMARS for sure. I did see footage of the HIMARS blowing up. I believe that was in Kuwait. And I mean, like again, various radio stations, aircraft parked. The Americans have not made huge inroads. They're not flying into Iranian territory. Definitely not for long, and definitely not deep. The vast majority of strikes are outside. They're using standoff munitions. Um,
Rapidly depleting standoff munitions to the point where the New York Times and Wall Street Journal are plagiarizing Substack writers to get these figures.
yes, yes, and the other thing is you're seeing publications like the Wall Street Journal asking how are their missile systems more accurate than before? They're firing less and they're more accurate. Well, part of that is they've blinded the US and destroying more of these radar stations. That's part of it. There's probably other reasons why maybe they're a little bit more accurate. There are suspicions noted that the Russians are helping them with this, particularly for the strikes against CIA agents in Bahrain at one of the hotels. So, I mean, I don't have any doubt. There was a meeting that took place between Rubio and Lavrov that lasted 25 minutes. And after the meeting, right away, the Americans were asking, like, I love how I love that. Like American lives are so sacred. It's almost like a quasi-religious thing. Are Russians helping kill American lives? It's like there's lives and then there are American lives.
Yes.
It just
And we
is
care so much
so
about these American
ludicrous.
lives that we're going to fight another war for Israel. But you better not touch
That's
them.
right. Better not. Better not.
Only we can
Uh,
march them to their deaths.
so I would say, and of course the Mandab is closed as well, not just the Strait of Hormuz. It's I mean, what are Trump's options? What is he going to do? Like he
Surely a
tacoed out
nuclear weapon will do the
Friday
job.
night. Yeah, he tacoed out, right? But of course he has to because he doesn't want to ruin the markets. And obviously the Iranians can weather this a lot better than the Americans. I mean, or well, less so than the Americans. Of course, you guys have noticed gas going up. Ours never went down, but I suppose in Europe and England prices have gone up. The British Isles. I'm assuming they have. I've seen figures for Europe and for America. People are scrutinizing the figures in America much more so because, of course, they're one of the belligerents in the war. So naturally they would. Anyways, um, yeah. Where does he go off with this? But uh, Iran has set up a kind of narrative out of this dialogue where if you attack us, we'll attack you. When you slow down, we'll slow down, which gives you an enormous sense of confidence in their abilities. And we said that, of course, the Ukrainians were given the go-ahead to attack this cargo ship that killed the captain. There may have been other deaths, but there were definitely other crew members that were seriously injured, perhaps killed. But I know the captain was killed. Because the Ukrainians will always go for the tower of the ship that has where the captain and the navigator are located. But people have said, well, what's Iran going to do? It's like, well, what should Iran do? I mean, it's smarter for Iran to do nothing because everybody knows what Iran's secret weapon is here. They've blocked trade. They're controlling the world economy.
And it's
Why
been,
why waste your missiles on Ukraine over one stupid drone?
and by the time this episode premieres, it will have been 5 months since the start of Operation Reddit Fury. And
Reddit Fury,
the
yes.
strait is still closed. It was
Hmm.
open on February 27th,
Briefly.
2026, but the strait is currently closed. The Iranians have fire control over it. You can't get any ships through the Omani side because the Iranians can open fire on the ships there, which, I mean, is the pretext they use to begin this most recent round of strikes. Now, I think that's a bit of a flimsy pretext. I don't think one violation by the Iranians necessarily would warrant a return to hostilities unless you were looking for them. But
Hmm.
here we are. And now the Iranians are in probably the most powerful position they've been in a number of years.
Absolutely.
I mean, let's just
Yes.
much smaller scale, but let's go back to I think it was 1987 during the Iran-Iraq War, where the Iranian Navy ran a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, and the U.S. Navy was actually able to break that blockade within a matter of weeks, and it was a very small, concise operation that pretty much flew under the radar of most Americans and is never talked about today. But sitting
Yeah.
here almost 40 years later, 39 years
If you
later,
didn't bring it up, I would have forgotten it forever.
yeah, it's one of those things that doesn't get talked about because of how quick it was. It was a short blockade breaking operation, and that was 39 years ago, which we're clearly not capable of still doing. I mean, you go back to 2002, the Millennium Project, the Millennium Project War Games. Now, there's some scrutiny around those about the way they were conducted, but generally speaking, what they predicted in 2002 is that the Iranians had the missile capability. This was before drones were really the force that they are today, but 2002. They predicted that in an all out confrontation, the Iranians had the capability to sink the Fifth Fleet. And you'll notice there's a reason why the Fifth Fleet is operating outside of the Gulf and more towards the Gulf of Aden in Yemen, even outside of Houthi missile range, because the Iranians do have the anti-ship missile capability. They probably do at this point. That combined with drones, I'm not saying necessarily to sink the Fifth Fleet, but to harass its operations to the point where it wouldn't be able to conduct the missions that it does conduct right now. There are so
One solid hit, of course, won't probably will not sink the ship. Definitely not.
no, but it can damage the
But you're
runway.
right. It will it will be out of service for a period of time. It's as good as sunk.
Yeah, and even some of the support fleet, like some of the cruisers, they might be able to do even more damage to those.
Hmm.
So because we're talking the entire carrier group there, but progressively as time went on, part and I could be projecting too much in the past, but I think part of the reason they didn't use 9/11 as a pretext for Iran is because it was too difficult. They did not, even at the height of American power in 2001, they did not have the capability to do that. So they went after Afghanistan, they went after Iraq. They hoped that the instability in the region would bleed over into Syria. It did. They succeeded in Syria eventually. It took them a decade and a half. And they hoped it would bleed over into Iran. And I think emboldening the Kurds was a large part of that. But as we've seen with this war, the Iranian Kurds are much more tied into the Iranian national identity. That when you get these more tribal nations like Syria and Iraq, Kurdish identity actually holds some weight, or a nation where they have adversarial relations like Turkey. But when they're part of when they're one of the constituent peoples of Iran, they have been for centuries, if not millennia, depending on how you want to count it. It's hard to get Kurdish separatism off the ground in Iran, and that was one of the that ties back in. That was one of the grand plans for a ground operation in Iran. That the Kurds are going to go in, and we're going to give them the air cover, and that they're going to overthrow the Ayatollah's regime, and it's going to bring freedom to Iran. Well, no, that's not going to happen. And then the question of like, oh, there's 8,000 U.S. troops that we could deploy from Jordan or from Kuwait, or they threw out all the different places we still marginally have bases. But that was also combined with the news that American forces are finally withdrawing from Iraq after 23 years. So we're in this position where every sign points towards escalation in rhetoric and even in some actions, but every concrete long term action suggests the Americans are leaving the region because they simply cannot sustain it and that there are simply no options. Now, the one everyone goes to that is fear mongered about, with some understanding on my end, is the idea that that we're going to nuke the Iranians, and I think that is a possibility. I'm not saying that is beyond uh, what may happen. Now, with all that being said, I've brought this up before. If even if we were to use a low yield tactical nuclear weapon, which is probably all we could get away with for the kind of operation we're looking to do, ultimately, what effect would it have on the Iranians? How would that end up affecting any change beyond rallying the country? Are you going to drop multiple tactical nuclear weapons on this country? Are you going to hit multiple cities? sure you might be able to effect some change. You might be able to bomb this country in submission, but if you leave a crater where Iran used to be, that is number one not going to accomplish your goal because it's still up in the air. Iran becomes a no man's land. Perhaps that's a preferred alternative to an Iran that remains but is hostile towards them. Or worse yet, you trigger a chain reaction because if you start firing off tactical nuclear weapons, that may extend. The Iranians may get their hands on one via Pakistan or Iran and hit somewhere, not necessarily in mainland America. I don't think they would have the missile range to do that, but somewhere in Israel or the Gulf states or some other major American assets. Tel Aviv might be flattened if we do that.
Yeah,
Which would
incidentally, that THAAD radar station that was destroyed in Jordan. Jordan has been hit very successfully. I don't know if they've lost one of the Patriot systems there as well, but there was a Air Force base that was attacked a few days ago, or it might have been last week, um, or sorry, rather the week before. But if that's the last THAAD system that you have and it's next door to Israel, that might have been the reason why the Americans immediately backed off, because it's the last good pair of eyes, if you will, that they have before impacts either on Israel or American troops, let's say in Jordan.
and there it is
I,
right
I don't
there.
know if there is
Jordan
or
being the punching bag for Israel for since the start of this war at least, but also for a number of
yeah.
years, where any hit that's supposed to go towards Israel is going to be absorbed by the Jordanians, and that
You know their president or their prince rather. He fled. He went to the UK.
um, like the actual like
What's his name?
sitting
Abdullah?
king or like the prince.
Yeah.
So King
The the,
Abdullah
the
left.
king.
Really, I
Yeah, he went to Britain. I mean, he's there momentarily, I guess.
I did not know that. And what's interesting is compared to some of the other monarchies, like it's the Hashemites, so they have some sort of historical legacy. They have some sort of legitimacy beyond, say, what the House of Saud or any of these other dynasties do. So
Yeah.
that's interesting that you bring that up.
Hmm.
Yeah, which quite foreboding if if I'm being honest with that. But yeah, it that is
I mean, you
probably
can tell how seriously they take Iran right now.
oh absolutely. There's a reason why even in all of this now, of course, the Israelis are always going to be doing something nefarious. It's just it's what we've come to expect. But you'll notice they've been less aggressive lately. That they haven't
Yeah.
been as willing to go into Lebanon or as willing to stir trouble in the region, or even in the Gaza Strip, they've been more reserved than what we've come to expect in the past
Hmm.
2.5, 3 years at this point. And I think, yeah, if they're hitting Thads in Jordan, that means Israel is next. And we've seen what they were capable of doing to Israel during both the Operation True Promise, the 12-day war, and this most recent bout back in February and March. And it's not inconceivable if this does escalate further that strikes on Israel will continue, especially if they go back into Lebanon, which one would think they would. And hey, what's that we always talk about? What's that I always have an unprompted urge to bring up whenever we talk about Israel? That's the curse of the eighth decade. Perhaps, I mean, we're sitting here in halfway through 2026. A lot can happen in 18 months. Who knows? We may see the Jewish people put into the diaspora once again. Of course, I would never wish that. But if we're speaking objectively, and I mean, let's look at the emigration rates for Israel. We also bring this up all the time. They're leaving. People are not moving to Israel. The idea of it being the safe haven is gone. The myth of Israeli invincibility that they gained for themselves, I would say, particularly during the 6 Day War, reinforced it with the 1973 war, that is all gone.
Hmm.
Israel is a country like any other. Israel is a uniquely vulnerable country with no strategic depth, no valuable resources, 9 million people, and completely dependent on its uh, arcane, entrenched political network inside the United States in order to ensure its survival. In which case, once it has that guarantee, it pushes its limits further and further and makes enemies wherever it can to the point where what was once a very rhetorical feud is becoming a much more real rivalry between the Turks and the Israelis.
Hmm.
Just making
Yeah,
it
yeah.
enemy of
I
everyone.
think they're like hedging on what if Iran doesn't like if the war with Iran doesn't go well. I think they're afraid of Turkey smelling blood.
Oh, of course. I mean, we've already
And
seen them butt heads in Syria. We have already seen the little bit of buyer's remorse they have with Jolani effectively being Erdogan's man.
yeah, to a degree. Now, Giuliani did make some overtures in the last few days about possibly going to war with Hezbollah, but
Ha!
really they're in no position to do this. And as I said before in the last show, if he dares to go into Lebanon, he will not just be fighting um, Hezbollah. Uh, Hezbollah will only gain more support because he's just a bridge too far for most Lebanese. Um, Anyways, they're in no position, and more news out of Syria is that Israel is proposing that a kind of a West Bank to like relocate. This is so cockamamie. A West Bank in the new territory that they've gained around the Golan Heights. Like
Yeah.
this is I think it's a pipe dream.
Oh, it is a pipe dream, but also just the suggestion of it, the rhetoric surrounding it. It's Jolani and HTS's Big Fat Fell For It Again award.
Yeah,
The only way to defeat the Zionists is to become their proxy, as goes the Sunni logic for, I don't know, the past 80 years
10,
at this
15
point.
years. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's you'll notice the rise of Islamism was the rise of Arabs' ability to counter Israel falling off a cliff.
Yes.
Yeah,
Israel's about to fall. Okay, we can help. I mean,
but have you considered the Shias might benefit from this if you destroy us? Yes,
yes.
Israel, we understand. We're all yours. Up there, what like I said, up there in a race with Anglos and American evangelicals for being the biggest golems in history.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I looked at like which states pay the most amount of money
Ah, yes, I believe you
to
sent me
is
this
yeah.
graphic. I'll look for it. Go on.
Yeah, so apparently it's no surprise, New York, or as a certain American politician, Jew York.
No, wait a minute.
But it's the state of New York, California, and Texas. And then with Texas is has to be those crazy
Yep.
evangelicals.
So you got diaspora, and evangelical. Same. Well, Florida is probably a pretty good mix between evangelicals and diaspora because a lot of them are tired of Florida.
Hmm.
Yeah. But for our American audience out there, this is your map. Wow, DC's only 73 million. Who would have thought? Even though for its
Oh,
size,
really?
that's actually that's quite a bit. I mean, it's only like 500,000 people, and you have to consider it's a lot of those people live in the slums. If you know anything about the demographics of Washington D.C., so yeah, that's not too bad. But yeah, a lot of these. I mean, yeah, look at that in Georgia, 452 million, Tennessee, 262 million, and even like Alabama and Mississippi down there. Keep in mind these are some of the poorest states in the United States. That's still 59 million apiece coming out of there. Louisiana, 188 million. So this is your tax dollars, also your private contributions for those of you who feel so inclined, hard at work to defend our greatest ally. And
Hmm.
you know what you get for that? You get smug satisfaction, not much else.
Yeah.
And even that's drying up. Critical shortages of smug satisfaction to be had in the West. I've noticed. I could be wrong, but that's just my personal observation. Now we
Mm,
are just over the 2 hour mark, and I know that recording time here we're pretty close to midnight, so I'll work
yeah.
on wrapping it up. And just the last thing I wanted to mention is I've said this before. I'll go through spurts where I listen to a lot of Tucker Carlson. And that is a combination of I am somewhat taken in by his charm, I will admit. But number two, I also think he's a very good barometer of I don't want to call it controlled opposition because he is very renegade in a lot of senses, especially these days. But in what some might consider to be an alternative power structure. You'll notice he always tempers his message. He always keeps one foot in both camps where he makes these very anti-establishment statements. He makes these very firebrand statements, a lot of which I imagine our audience would agree with. I certainly agree with. I don't want to speak for you,
Mm,
but I assume you would probably agree with quite a bit of it.
yeah.
But then he tempers it with a lot of the rhetoric that we're used to. But I've noticed that whoever his handlers are, if you want to put it that way, or whoever is above him, quote unquote, is has given him free reign on Israel. That he's willing to attack it. Now he goes for a very, I guess you could call it classical liberal line, which is like, oh, I don't like the Netanyahu government. I'm sure the Israeli people are just fine, and they deserve
Oh
a.
yeah, it's an aberration.
Yeah, it's an aberration. Like I said, you need to be able to take what he says with a heaping of salt, if you will. But there still is a lot of valuable information to be gleaned from his programs. I've noticed if you're willing to approach them with the right lens. And the reason I say all of this is because he was interviewing this individual. I cannot remember his name. Let me look it up. But this guy's specialty was the energy markets. And I will say, his guests can be very hit or miss. Sometimes it's very good, very informative shows. Other times I sit there thinking, what the hell am I listening to? But this guy, I haven't checked his credentials. I haven't looked into his body of work, so he could be a quack for all I know. But what he was saying at least sounded like it made sense. So I took it at face value. So let me just pull up this guy's name. Um, Dr. Chris Martinson is this guy's name. And it was about an hour and a half interview. Like I said, worth the listen if you have the time. And he was talking about the global energy markets. And one thing he pointed out in particular that I did not know is that America's status as an energy exporter is due to really cooking the books because they count things like kerosene as an export.
Yes, yes. Not jet fuel.
Not
not
petroleum, not aviation
not
fuel.
petroleum. No, 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 no. It's everything. But they're actually an importer. It's just there to hoodwink the American population. That's all it is.
Yes, and that the days of the shale boom are long behind us, and any hope of that being America's salvation. Well, yeah, those fields are quite dried up, as it were, and I mean, they're not entirely tapped, but we're getting to the point where it's becoming more trouble than it's worth to really extract the energy from this. So we're operating on this assumption that we're this net energy exporter who can afford to shake up the global energy markets to drive the world into a depression because we can just ration, we can just reserve, and we'll be able to continue on functioning as is. And that's something I thought was true for a long time. That's something I actually based a lot of my assumptions on, including my prediction last week that sure they'll put rationing on the American population, but they'll do it if it means crippling everyone else. But it turns out that might not exactly be the case. Something else he also pointed out, this Martinson guy, was about the price of oil per barrel, which is interesting because what's said for Brent crude, for the oil markets there, if you calculate, when you look at the way these energy companies actually sell out and distribute oil, as opposed to the 90 something dollars it was at the time of the program, that was probably sometime last week, the rate at which oil is actually selling for is closer to 140 in terms of people who actually go out there uh, in the energy industry and purchase a barrel of oil to refine it into petroleum or whatever other uses it might have, so they can sell it on the market as gasoline, as whatever else it might be. And that explains gas prices a lot more. That explains the energy situation, the energy crisis a lot more. And that, while I am hesitant to doomsay about a lot of these things, it does paint a picture where the energy situation is much more dire than it might be. And while I'm poaching other people's work, another video I would recommend is from and I know that probably like at least a quarter of you listening to this probably came from him anyway. From Argent, he put out an interesting video on just some speculation on the energy sector. Went into more depth about the numbers. Like I said, I would recommend it. But judging by his prediction, I'm willing to take it at face value. I trust his work. I've talked to him a number of times. Like I said, a lot of you probably came here from there, so I appreciate that. That January, when, especially in North America, is really when it's going to be crunch time in the energy industry if some sort of off ramp is not found for this conflict. And then that's also compounding the energy fields that have been offline since the beginning of this war. And mind you, these are not systems that are made to be turned off, they're made for continuous production. So these energy fields in Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, etc., that have been shut down or have reduced production, we still need to make up for that loss of quality, loss of quantity, I should say, and quality in that to some extent, which will take months, if not years, to get these things repaired and back to full capacity because of the condition of this war. So we're looking at, as many of us said at the beginning of this war, a prolonged economic crisis surrounding this. And there's seemingly no off ramp. Trump keeps doing this thing where we'll hit them hard, but when things get a little too escalatory, when things get a little too hot, like when the Iranians hit a missile system, a THAAD system in Jordan, or when the global energy markets look a little too volatile, we'll pull back. We'll get off the Persian carousel. Then 6 weeks later, we'll get back on. And we'll keep doing this until the midterms when, I don't know, maybe a Democratic Congress will put the brakes on it, but, I mean, their only opposition to Trump is tactical, not strategic. Let's be clear about that. Oh, that's a wonderful Truth Social post. The Indiaification of Donald Trump is really coming full circle. Let me put this up. They're not sending their best interns. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah, isn't it just the most ridiculous? I saw it in a group chat, and I genuinely asked, "Is this real?" Like,
Old Trump had so much more charm.
this is just
Like
cringe.
2016 to 2020 Trump, that was your greatest hits. Then he had a few afterwards. The whole Butler, Pennsylvania thing gave me hope that we were going to get Keno Trump again, but I don't think it's happening.
Trump. No,
Yeah, no,
no.
like I said, Butler was that really. It was the last real cinematic moment he had, and how much of one wants to believe that was staged or not, whatever. But point being is, like, he gets grazed and like he's defiant. Like that's the last. And like I said, you can question that if you want to, but that's the last close. That's the closest thing you're going to get to cool Trump ever again. It's all downhill from here. Okay,
Yeah.
slight addendum. Him going off on Zelensky was funny, but that was the ultimate false hope.
Yeah, it was. It truly was. He may not like him personally, but he's not going to deviate from the plan,
No,
especially when he has to focus on Iran, because his administration is all about Iran.
you know my favorite part about that Zelensky exchange is when the press were interrogating him afterwards, and like some reporters like, well, what if blah blah blah, and Trump just says, what if anything? What if a bomb drops in your head right now? Like I said, that was the last great Trump moment we got.
I totally agree. That line.
Yeah. Uh, After February
So
2025,
meme worthy, my
it's
God.
I still have that on a soundboard somewhere. But like I said,
Yeah.
we're never gonna get those moments again, and it's all downhill from here.
Yeah, remember the good times. Um, we should mention before we close out the show that Laura Loomer
Oh yes,
visited Ukraine and confessed to Zelensky that she was duped by Russian propaganda. Like, as if she doesn't know any of this. Does Ukraine have Nazis? Then she visits the head rabbi of Ukraine, and it's there for the Western audiences, especially the shit libs, because I mean that's who it's for, right? Um, to convince them that there are no Nazis, right?
It's
But
okay. They're all philo-Semitic Nazis.
literally, right? And as I've always said, why is it the Nazis killing Russians is not a crime, but killing Jews is, or Poles, or whomever, or Serbs? Why are they not crimes, but just Jews are, right? And you have to understand, there's lots of countries that don't have either position, right? And anyways, everybody knows these are kosher Nazis, but Russians don't devalue themselves. They think the greater crime is that Hitler killed them, not Jews, right? So the context of Nazi is completely different, anyways. But the more that they demonstrate to the world that actually Ukraine is very Jewish, and of course there was an Instagram post with Zelensky and the head rabbi, and their solution to Russia is to build more synagogues.
So true. They need that Talmudic magic.
Yeah, more more synagogues, more Holocaust memorials, more Holocaust museums. That was literally their little thumbnail on Instagram that I saw. Yeah, so I find this funny because in many ways this is a desperate moment of messaging. Laura Loomer is never supposed to touch the sacred ground that belongs to Western shitlibs, because the vast majority of Western shitlibs who are not Jewish, uh, because the majority of Jews support Ukraine, obviously, but of non-Jews, slightly older white people, and they don't like her. They hate her. They hate MAGA. They hate Trump. And now they're really working hard on trying to, I don't know, get centrist, um, people slightly left of center and slightly right of center on board with their, anti-Russia stance. But
Well,
she's
what?
an Israel supporter. She's a hardcore Zionist. People hate her. So who is she appealing to? Because the youth don't really like her. Boomers do, yeah. Some of the older Gen X evangelicals in America like her, but nobody else does. And so I just think this is a very desperate moment of messaging. The narrative is completely. They will be sickened by her.
Oh yeah, as any reasonable person would. And I sent you something that
Because for the shit libs, for the shit libs, their necessity to believe in America and the redemption of America is very strong. So the way they have always excused this, because they know very well America funds Ukraine and they fund Israel, and those two are never to touch. And now they know they don't want to understand this as one war, but two separate wars. They have to create an artificial separation.
now GSP. I sent you a classic piece of Chinese
Yep.
wisdom that I have up on the screen right now, and I want you guys
Okay.
to look at this. And in the bottom left corner of this image, that describes Laura Loomer. And if you go up to the top left of that, that is where you get a lot of these more lefty liberal boomer and like liberal types.
Yeah.
Yeah, so right there, you have the people who are in the naive anti-warism, and then you go down somebody like Laura Loomer. You have dogs of the U.S. Empire. You have the State Department position right there. It's like I said, a nice piece of classic Chinese wisdom for this last leg of the show here. But no, I'm glad you brought that up because it is a good question of who is this appealing
And
to.
Tim Pool tweeted out,
Well, I mean, Tim Pool.
Israel and Ukraine did nothing wrong. Like he has finally become the sellout, the complete sellout he was always destined to be.
Can I say something not necessarily in his defense, but a theory I have?
Uh,
I think after that whole Tenet media thing, because he was involved in that, that somebody in the FBI or State Department, they have him in a vice, so they're gonna make him like spew out all their messages if he wants to maintain his comfortable lifestyle.
yes, and I think everybody now understands that it's actually one war,
Oh, absolutely, and
and the Anglo-Judeo group is fighting this other group.
yeah,
Everybody knows it.
that's yeah, that's what it is.
It doesn't mean people still won't compartmentalize it.
Yeah, and believe it or not, I know some bizarre people down there in that bottom right quadrant, and it's like it's to your own detriment. I mean, the head of the Mossad is now a Belarusian Jewish guy named Goffman, who probably has a lot of ethnic resentment towards the Russians. So,
Yeah.
uh, the once friendly or cooperative relationship between Israel and Russia that is long gone. I just want.
Oh, did you know Ben Wallace made a tweet a few days ago?
Uh-oh, what'd he say?
So he finally let loose that he spoke with Netanyahu
Oh.
and urged Netanyahu to support Ukraine. And in his words, Netanyahu said, "I don't want to anger the Russians. I don't want to." I kid you not. I kid you not. Which is what we suspected, anyways. So this was at the beginning of 2023 or end of 2022, because he served till I think mid 2023. Wallace did,
Yeah.
and then Wallace went on to describe the situation as ironic because Iran developed its while you could have been helping Ukraine. Uh, Iran was working with the Russians to develop Shahed drones and whatnot, and that's who caused you so much pain and consternation, et cetera, et cetera. But I thought that was a funny admonition on his part. He doesn't have to make that kind of a statement. He doesn't have to, 3 years after the fact, uh, mention these details, but he did.
Well, no, it's kind of funny because you see it taking shape right now where something I had vaguely predicted is that Trump was allowed to get reelected in 2024. And I said this in the lead up
Yeah.
to and following his election because he was supposed to fall on his sword on a number of issues. I said, number one, the inevitable economic fallout of the post 2020 world between both Trump and Biden's actions, don't get me wrong. Number two, I thought when Ukraine inevitably fails, they want Trump to be the fall guy who's left holding the bag. And
Yeah.
that number three, when they want to regime change Iran, and as we saw, they failed, they want Trump to be the one to get his hands dirty. But what it looks like right now is, and I don't know how accurate this polling data is, only about 33% of Americans support the Iranian war. But what I think they're trying to do right now is they're trying to take that core base of MAGA diehard loyalists, Trump
Yep.
diehard loyalists, and wed them to the Ukraine issue because you have many on the right who, even if they're not pro Russia, cannot give a damn enough to support Ukraine, and that they take a neutral position, if not a pro Russian position. That's a large amount of the right in the West. On the left, you have, of course,
And
the
this is vexed every single administration, Trump's and Biden's,
oh yes,
that they cannot consolidate the left and the right, both being pro-war or anti-Russia, both in America and in Britain.
across the West, really.
Yeah, across the West. The BBC in June had a video about, and they always have to do this in quotations. Russia's so-called right-wing groups influencing Putin's government. So they have to say so-called as if they're not right-wing, right? Because the messaging is please, please, please don't believe that they're right wing, but they are right wing.
or the quarterly story they put out that Russia is responsible for the migrant crisis and not Western governments.
Yeah, yeah. Like,
We're only letting them in with open arms, but because Wagner Group is sledgehammering some jihadists in Africa, that's the migrant crisis right there.
like Russia is literally sent a young woman who put her stupid vibrator next to one of those Easter cakes baked for Pascha uh, to 4 years in a labor camp for doing that. But yeah, they're not really based.
No, no. Putin visited the Wailing Wall 20 years ago.
my my favorite is when Westerners like in the chats, like on Instagram, when they see a post like this, they'll say, I mean, I like that Russia's embracing their Christian roots, but this might be going too far. It's like, you people aren't ready. You're not ready.
But to continue the
So-
point about trying to psyop the left and the right into this position where we need to be foaming at the mouth going to war with Russia. You see this, so you have that on the right where the core of the Zio right are now convinced that Russia is the evil third worldist power who's emboldening the Iranians and threatening our greatest ally in Israel. And then on the left, you have the obvious standard liberal position where, well, maybe Israel's going too far, but ultimately they're still our ally, and we just need to rein them in. And Ukraine, they're fighting against the new Hitler, so they deserve our full unbridled support for everything. But you'll notice as the pro-Palestinian left grows more and more, while a lot of those people might be pro-Ukraine in the abstract, they can't be bothered to give a damn with how intense the situation in the Middle East is. So some of them see through it, and some of them have taken the, I guess you could say, anti Russia position. But on the other hand, a lot of them are too fixated on the Palestine issue to care about Ukraine, which also screws over the establishment in that regard because Ukraine's not getting that swell of popular support it did have in the first 6 months of 2022.
Mhm, mhm.
So now Ukraine, in order to stay relevant, needs to wed itself openly to
Yes,
this Iran war because that's the only way he's going to get Donald Trump's attention. That's the only way Zelensky's going to get Donald Trump's attention
absolutely.
is to convince him that, hey, your buddy Putin, he's actually the biggest sponsor of the Iranians, and you need to give him a stern talking to by giving us more, our 5 billion rockets so we can bomb the Donbass more.
Hmm.
And I don't know. In a way, I'm glad they came out and admitted everything that we've been talking about for the past 4 years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The two ends which should not never have touched, and here
Because
we are.
they have no choice but to reveal it because they need to rally what's left of the so-called MAGA base into the standard anti-Russia line, which is very funny seeing how far we've fallen since 2016.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, the last thing I'll say in this regard and for the show with the whole Loomer thing is you'll notice that there was a contingent of these Zio right people who are fanatically pro-Israel, and I think Loomer's a good representation of it. But we're always willing to play coy with the Russians, and a lot of people put the cart before the horse. And I think you know the kind of people I'm talking about. Some of them very disingenuously saying, "Well, that means Russia must be part of the Zionist project too." No, what they're trying to do is they're trying to sweeten the pot for the Russians. Like, oh, if you just let us have Iran, you can be part of our base Western alliance. Well, that was never going to be the case,
Yeah,
especially when
yeah,
they're
of
funding the
course.
ongoing Ukrainian war. And it's you saw this particularly around the time when I think around the time when Orban lost power because a lot of people were scrutinizing his Israeli ties. And like I said, I'm not here to defend those, but if you look at actual Hungarian foreign policy during the Orban years, you'll notice a lot of trade with Iran, very close to Russia, and a lot of very, I don't know, symbolic gestures towards Israel without much weight behind them. But like I said, he should have never crossed that bridge. He screwed himself over that way. But ultimately, I think a lot of people overlook what the real Hungarian strategic position was with that. And
Hmm.
they're wondering, it's like, oh well, why are so many of these pro-Israel networks pro Orban and pro Russia? It's because they're trying to peel the people like Orban and the people like, I don't know, some of the more nationalistic elements, I guess you could say, of the Russians into this idea that, oh, well, Israel is a bastion of our civilization against the Islamic hordes. Well,
Yes.
it's, and it,
They were trying to do what they have successfully done in America, the Anglosphere, and a few Western European countries.
yeah, and it didn't work because it's a hard sell that you care about our civilizational interests when you're convincing Ukrainians by the hundreds of thousands to march their deaths to try to destroy us.
Yes.
And then you call us third worldist when we get mad about it.
Yeah, exactly. With such babies, like
Yeah, it's like,
they tolerated them, the Russians did, for so long, including the right, and now they're pissed off because essentially the Russians are done with them.
yeah, we're going to provoke Islamic insurgency in Chechnya, but trust us, you need to join our based anti jihadist alliance. We're going to support al Jalani taking over Syria, but we are fighting against Islamic terrorism. And once again, it's all the same thing that uh, we hate Muslims until we can mobilize them.
Yeah.
It's what and it's what it always is.
I'll give the Russian government credit for that. They managed their messaging, and the average Russian never fell for it.
Yeah, rightfully so, because it plain as day that clearly, regardless the opinions of certain political factions in the West or Western public opinion, the governments in power in the West that are going to be there for the foreseeable future want your nation broken and divided because they don't accept the most disgusting form of liberalism. Uh, funny enough, listening to a McGregor interview, I think he was, who was he talking to? But he always has a wealth of quotes, and this was one I was listening to last week, where he was talking to, I don't know, maybe it was Glenn Deason. I think that was the format there, but Deason or whoever the host is asking him like, well, what do you think that Russia would have to do in order to seek reconciliation with the West? And he said something about like opening their markets to foreign capital and becoming transgender individuals. And no, that's exactly what it is. Like that's
Yes.
those are the terms and conditions of a deal with the West. And the Colonel could not have said it any better. As somebody who I always thought was a reasonable voice, but never went too far back, I don't know, in 2019, 2020, always enjoyable. But I have to say, since this most recent bout of the Iran war, the man has no filter, and
Yeah, he's wonderful to listen to.
he's quickly become one of my favorite political commentators.
Hmm.
But that's all I had for this episode. If you have
Hmm.
any final closing news,
Final
now's the...
closing news: Russia has told Iran that they can use their space for any attack against Ukraine that they wish. You kid you? I kid you not. I just saw that tonight.
Imagine if the IRGC hits Zelensky before the Russian military.
Russia's telling him he's over here. He's over here. Oh,
Oh,
oh, that would be so awesome. Anyhow, never mind. Never mind. I mean, in um,
hypothetically,
hypothetically, yeah,
speaking purely as an
Roblox.
intellectual exercise.
Yeah, only in Minecraft.
Yeah, I don't know. Do the kids still play? I'm too old to keep track of these things.
Me too.
As far as I know, the Minecraft defense did not hold up in court, so we need to shift to something else. What? Speaking completely in the abstract, with no plans to either support or doing any of these actions, etc., etc., etc.
I'm against all forms of violence.
Yeah, yes. To quote Dima from Military Summary, we condemn all violence everywhere. And you know what? I can think of no better words than to show on.
Yeah.
So, until next time, we see you guys, and goodbye.
Goodbye and take care.